Thank you, Ambassador. And you have written several important commentaries, and I had the privilege of reading several of them. I will come to that, Ambassador, in a while. Let me go to Dr. Swaran Singh in New Delhi, Professor of International Relations at the JNU. Dr. Swaran Singh, how would you like to address? What are your initial thoughts on the topic of discussion today, that India's growing stature?
Thank you, Wasbir. I first of all wish to share that I fully agree with Ambassador Bhatia's assessment. What I can say in addition is that it takes a whole spectrum of several elements coming together to make India the way India looks today at international stage. Of course, a very dynamic, proactive leadership of Prime Minister is orchestrating that new India globally in that sense, but it's also the whole civilizational ethos, the civilizational power that India has always believed in, engaging the world and seeing world as one. And that was true even when we had relatively less leverages, and now of course India is the fourth largest economy, a leading hub for technology and so on, largest democracy, and many things can be put together. On top of it, of course, is the technical and economic power. And how to articulate that at global level has a very different genre now. Let me say this in 30 seconds, that right from beginning of India's independence, there was a set of political elite that believed in dialogue, persuasion and peace, which ruled us for almost the first 5 decades or nearly 6 decades. At that time also there was this other set of political elite that used to talk about India must build nuclear weapon right from 1950s. Now it so happens that when India emerges as a powerful nation, as a powerful dynamic society, that particular power elite happens to be at the helm today, which is very confident in wielding and using and asserting power. And that makes India a very different India at the global stage, as assertive India that wants to follow its own civilizational perspectives, its own national interest, but engaged with as many countries in as many sectors as possible. And I think that is a combination of several things coming together that makes India very visible. And my last point on this is the unique thing that only Indian Prime Minister has introduced in international relations. Never in history you saw that a leader visiting a foreign land has large number of people chanting his name. This has never happened in any other leader's case. It happens in Prime Minister's case because he constantly engages with community engagement with people of Indian origin and turn them into ambassadors of India in that sense. And that is very unique way of presenting India at the global stage. And I think that is something that has really made the world look around and see India as a completely different and very, very persuasive and powerful country today.
Absolutely. That is global South today, Ambassador, is very, very important, because one of the critical issues that faces us today is climate change and of course debt relief. These are the two critical issues. We will deal a little bit with that with you, Ambassador. Let me once again quickly turn to Professor Swaran Singh. Professor, the Prime Minister's recent visit to Brazil, I look at it as a very, very significant step, because both India and Brazil are working together for a permanent membership, for a permanent seat in the United Nations, permanent membership of the UN Security Council. How do you look at it? Because do you think that is something which will make everything complete if India gets a permanent membership of the UN Security Council?
I may disappoint you, Basveer, on this, because I have slightly a very different view on that subject.
Right.
I think India outside UN Security Council puts the onus on UN Security Council. If UN Security Council wants to be reflective and representative of the world we live in and be effective in its implementation of various resolutions it passes, it is now incumbent upon UN Security Council to make sure countries like India or Brazil are made part of UN Security Council on permanent basis. In fact, India's credibility, I even dare say, being outside United Nations Security Council is perhaps much more. Then in case India becomes member of UN Security Council, where it may be under pressure to either take sides. There are already divisions in UN Security Council Permanent P5. China, Russia on one side, UK, France and United States on other. India may be pushed to take sides. So India is right now not facing that kind of a situation. But let me also underline that the BRICS summit in Rio de Janeiro, because President Vladimir Putin and President Xi Jinping did not show up there, brought enormous focus and I think expectation from India's Prime Minister being there. And of course, India is going to be, seen as an important country, as guiding consensus in that. BRICS is also now being called the other G20 because now they have 10 members and another 10 partner nations. Of course, another 20 want to join it as well.
Yeah.
So the aspiration of several nations to bring credibility to BRICS makes India's participation in BRICS very interesting. I want to make a point that India is seen today as voice of sanity, both in groupings like BRICS, where you have China and Russia. Preponderance of their views are always visible there. They want to focus on de-dollarization. Likewise, India is also voice of sanity in quadrilateral security framework, where we often hear voices which are anti-China in that sense, focusing on containment of China. So it's a balancing thing. And allow me, Basveer, to just make one quick point on the military power of India. And I hope General Kalita will agree with me. India today has between 4th or 5th largest defense budget in the world, also one of the largest militaries, nuclear weapons state, very potent armed forces. But the legitimacy, respect and power of India's military that comes to India's stature is because of two reasons. One, look at your periphery, your neighborhood from Pakistan in west to Thailand in the east, the way militaries have behaved in these countries. Indian military has continued to be extremely professional, ensuring primacy of politics in their civil and military relationship. Second point, it is not the power of Indian military which impresses the world, it is the restraint of Indian armed forces.
Absolutely.
You look at what Russia is doing in Ukraine for 4+ years, what now Israel is doing in Gaza for more than a year. India's Operation Sindoor was very precise. In fact, we went to start that saying that we are willing to stop it as soon as our objectives are filled. In fact, that represents an example how to use your armed forces in a very precise fashion. And I think that brings greater credibility to India as a nation which can command its military and use it to just exactly fulfill political objectives. And not go out of control the way things are happening in some other countries where militaries are really going berserk and they have their own pressure. Pakistan is another example. Field Marshal now, Asim Munir, is the way he's leading the country. So I think that power of Indian military brings enormous prestige to India as a nation. And that I think needs salutations to Indian armed forces.
Absolutely. Dr. Swaran Singh, do you get a sense? Do you get a sense that India is trying to recalibrate its strategy with China? Because we saw a lot of heated cross talk between the United States and China over that we saw that trade war. Some kind of a thaw in that trade war appears to have emerged. We don't know how it pans out in the days ahead. Do you think that is one of the reasons, or do you think the geopolitics has enabled or rather forced India to sort of recalibrate its equations with China? Because, for example, the Chinese too are saying that, okay, we should resume direct flights between India and China that was snapped during COVID, so on and so forth.
See, this question has been answered with far more clarity by Foreign Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar himself several times, including in his book, Why Bharat Matters, and of course also in the India Way. India fundamentally seeks to build much stronger developmental partnership with the United States, but at the same time manage, quote unquote, a relationship with the immediate large neighbor called China. And in that sense, the focus has been in managing and not immediately being very confident of resolving issues. And in that managing, India wants to not being seen as bandwagoning United States, and therefore very often India has to deal with pressures from United States, particularly during the first term of President Trump, and of course not yet, but could potentially again come back on India in that sense. But when you mentioned approach that India has vis-a-vis China, particularly from October last year when Prime Minister Modi and President Xi met in Kazan and a whole new process of disengagement started, India believes in resolving the border issues first, and the language Foreign Minister uses is relations are not normal as long as borders are not normalized. And therefore India has focused on disengagement, demilitarization of the border, and starting, for example, Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, which is border centric. Chinese, on the other hand, have a very different take on the subject. They believe no single issue should be allowed to hold the entire relationship hostage. And they want to open the entire relationship simultaneously. Therefore, they want to talk about trade, they want to talk about flights, they want to talk about every issue on the table, which is now how India looks at it. And therefore, certain kind of, I think, progression has continued. We will possibly see end of this month, 25th round of special representative talks happening in New Delhi as the Foreign Minister Wang Yi will visit. Right now, this Sunday, Dr. Jaishankar is, after a long time, after Galwan crisis, first time going to China to attend the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Foreign Ministers meeting. So certain dialogue is continuing, trade is continuing, but there are issues where India and China really have to be very skeptical and cautious. And to that, let me add very quickly in about 30 seconds, the new kind of relationship that Chinese are building with Pakistan. What happened during the recent 3 weeks back Shanghai Cooperation Organization Defense Ministers meeting, where Indian Defense Minister Rajnath Singh refused to sign the joint statement,
Yes.
was very aggressive way of not mentioning Pahalgam, but mentioning Balochistan. And that pandering to Pakistan as its most allied ally, supporting that country during these military confrontation with India, that to me sets a kind of a China-Pakistan Axis 2.0, which India will have to be careful in calibrating how to deal with this combination of China and Pakistan. China is also holding trilateral meetings with China, Pakistan, Afghanistan, China, Pakistan, Bangladesh.
Absolutely.
You know, India has to be really careful as to how to manage that relationship. But we, of course, have our own set of challenges with India-US relationship as well. Maybe we will talk about it in the second half of discussion.
Right, absolutely. Points made by Dr. Ivan Leverett there. One is South Asia is not economically really integrated, and that is a challenge, and China is taking advantage of that fact. And number two is that China perhaps wants India to get bogged down with affairs in its neighborhood so that it gets its other focus is diverted and concentrated in this area. Let me go to Dr. Swaran Singh. Dr. Swaran Singh, let's take a case study. I'm going into the broad picture once again, away from our neighborhood. Now, take the case study of Russia and Ukraine. And India has been some kind of a traditional ally of Russia, and as a democracy, it cannot also ignore Ukraine, as our Prime Minister or our government has been trying to maintain a delicate balancing act even in this conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
Exactly. I think Ukraine to me presents a case study where India has showcased how it can balance between very, very contradictory pulls and pressures.
Yeah.
Obviously, United States was absolutely unhappy with the fact that India continued and in fact expanded suddenly its oil imports from Russia. They wanted to toe American line and speak and condemn Russia, which India has not condemned Russia at all. But remember, India at the same time has constantly been trying to send humanitarian assistance to Ukrainians on the ground.
Yes.
So what India as a policy has clarified to the world is, one, that India focuses much more on the brass tacks in a conflict situation, the way Ukraine and Russia war has been continuing. And India wants to make sure that victims on the ground are given relief as soon as possible. while at the same time working directly, indirectly to ensure that the parties to conflict themselves come to dialogue rather than one side pushing the other. The whole American approach has been equipping Ukraine to fight against Russia. No effort to make peace. In fact, in the very first 3 weeks of February 2022, when the war began, there were dialogue happening and that could have perhaps led to certain ceasefire until you saw the Prime Minister Johnson from UK going to Kiev and telling that whole world is with you and we want you to stand up and fight against Russia, and we have continued to fight for 4.5 years now. So India's approach has really been clarified, and same is happening, for example, on Israel versus Gaza. India has been sending humanitarian assistance
Yes.
to the Palestinians on the ground, but at the same time saying Israel has a right to ensure its security. So I think that is a fantastic way of how both these cases have given an opportunity to India to ensure what I call a proactive neutrality here, which is not static because India doesn't just stand apart. You have seen Indian Prime Minister constantly pushing, nudging Russian leader again and again, saying this era is not era of war. We should not allow unilateral manipulation of international boundaries. He said, my heart goes out for those people who are receiving the civilians, who are receiving the bombing. And look at the whole statements after statement, where India has also tried to nudge Russian side, and of course, engage. You see, prime ministers having a bear hug with Zelensky as well.
Yes.
So, effort to make sure the great leaders who are involved in the conflict themselves begin to talk, while at the same time victims on the ground are provided relief without taking any sides in that sense. I think this was a difficult choice for India to make, but India has so far steered very clear and ensured its policy is understood. And I think increasingly both Russia and the United States understand India's own interests will guide their policies, and we will not be browbeating either side or bandwagoning either side. In that sense, standing for India's own national interests. And I think that has received increasing recognition both in Washington and in Moscow.
Absolutely, I quite like the use your coinage, Dr. Swaran Singh, proactive neutrality. Proactive neutrality. I really like it. Last word to you, Ambassador.